I'm Dong Shi in Beijing. Welcome to CCTV News Desk. At this hour, some international media are reporting that the International Tribunal in The Hague has released its ruling on an arbitration case brought up by the Philippines against China regarding South China Sea issues. We have a team of reporters covering this at this hour for us. Let's first go to our reporter, Hona, in Beijing. Hona, what more can you tell us at this hour? Our Hona is standing by in Beijing. She is one member of our reporters team that are covering this at this moment. Now let's go to our studio guests. We have two experts here joining us in the studio today. They are Professor Zhu Feng, the Executive Director of China Center for Collaborative Studies of South China Sea at Nanjing University. Welcome to the studio, Professor. And we have Professor Zhang Xinjun from the School of Law in Tsinghua University. Welcome to you as well, Professor Zhang. As we wait to hear more details about that ruling, I want to get started by talking about China's stance on this matter. China's stance has been very clear and very consistent right from the beginning that China does not participate in the arbitration, nor will China accept any ruling that comes out of it. Let me start with you, Mr. Zhu. Why does China maintain such a stance?
I think a couple of very primary reasons behind China's rejection of a participation and we say acceptance. First of all, we consider Philippines firing against China is some sort of, we say, legal trap. Because, you know, the UN, we say, Convention of Law of the Sea very clearly also regulates. So the international legal regulations concerning the sea maritime disputes will not cover the sovereign disputes related some sort of, we say, such a frictions. But Philippines make a very great mark of their some sort of the memorial and turning it into some sort of, we say, a very deceitful, you know, memorial vis-a-vis China. So that's why we completely disagree. The second is we consider arbitral tribunal really cross a line, they abuse the power. Because under the UNCLOS, we also see such a sovereignty issue will be, we say, excluded, particularly with China's some sort of official announcement of, we say, exclude China from those sovereignty related and the demarcation related and the historical right related with the third-party settlement mechanism. But
China has opted out.
Of course, we make it very clear back to 2006. But even in that sense, the tribunal also just declare some sort of a jurisdiction of the Philippines, you know, the firing. We consider it's abuse of the power, abuse of the judicial power. Then there's a last very important reason. For example, the UNCLOS also very, very firmly, you know, regulates. So before the jurisdiction just proceed well, then all the parties first they should exclude the diplomatic means. That means diplomatic solution usually should precede any international tribunal, you know, the process. But the Philippines does not oblige itself for this some sort of a very important international norm. Then second is, according to UNCLOS, the Philippines also should be responsible for communicating with China, but they unilaterally against China as well. So putting all these things together, then we'll see the firing and the ruling, both, they are totally illegal.
According to China, the door for negotiation, the door for consultation was never closed.
Yes.
China has maintained that it welcomes bilateral negotiations with Philippines. Another very important fact is that China has called the tribunal had no jurisdiction in this matter. Of course, has to do with the UNCLOS, just like Professor Zhu just said over there. But Philippines had to know back in 2013 that when it filed the arbitration case, it had to work around the matters in order to get that case accepted by that tribunal, which the tribunal did. Professor Zhang, let me get from you. Why do you think the tribunal accepted this case after all?
Well, that is something special in arbitration. It's not a standing court. In a normal case in international court of justice, if you submit a ridiculous claim to the tribunal, it will never be put into the general list of the cases in that court. But here we have a arbitral tribunal. It's an ad hoc one. It has been formed all of a sudden, as Professor Zhu introduced, and then it's somehow that it just goes that way. So that is, which means that even you submit a ridiculous case, at first the tribunal will be composed in accordance with the relevant rules, and then it will keep going on that way. So it's just something special in arbitration.
Well, China's stance has been very clear. It doesn't participate, it doesn't accept, but some might argue that this stance has left China in a rather fragile or unfavorable place because there is no presence of China throughout this whole process. Do you think that's the case?
Somehow it may be, because we will consider some sort of, we say, generalization of international norm and norm taking, usually a very formidable measure for international community members to abide by. So then it will just leave some sort of, we say, such a broad shared impression. If Beijing stand away from the jurisdiction, if Beijing opposed to some sort of tribunal, we say, awards, then it will be indicator of China is not a good guy. But I think that kind of thinking is very naive and simple. The reason is two. One is any international instrument usually is ultimately submit or subsiding to, we say, some sort of a real condition of international relations. Then we will see what kind of factors usually just has hidden from the international such a tribunal, like endorsement. We will see the U.S., we will see some Japan, we will see a lot of regional players that appear to be a very interesting contender with China on geographical, regards. So if we're looking since this way, then we will see so far the complexity of Philippines, such a firing against China and the tribunal's some sort of, we say, jurisdiction have gone much beyond some sort of purified, such a description just driven some sort of, we say, such arguments and counter arguments. It has a very badly, but also, of course, very interestingly, turning into some sort of geostrategical battle. So then, on that sense, I think Beijing don't need to be shy about China just project ourselves in a very clear and a very steady way. The second is, without some sort of, we say, a real improvement of bilateral relations, for example, Beijing-Manila relations, previous Philippine governments, Aquino III, usually is very emotional, very hostile. They, on the one hand, they just crying, for example, Philippines is very asymmetrical in the term, of the power and the strength, but on the other hand, they always say it's the only way the Philippines defends themselves. But the problem is Manila very hysterious, crying some sort of China's bully, China's intimidation. But as you mentioned, China never closed the door for any diplomatic contacts. So then the former Manila government's some sort of such a hostility usually is really delegitimize some sort of, we say, such a international norm-based very benign interactions between two sides. Given this, so we couldn't also be some sort of, we say, shy away from some sort of Philippines, we say, blackmailing tactics. They just trying to use some sort of such a tribunal process and the third-party settlement to force the Beijing give up our sovereign claims. So we consider it's really conspiracy. So put all the things together and then say, yes, on the one hand, China should very strongly, we say, become a very important role taker. But on the other hand, we couldn't be manipulated by the Philippines as a players.
That's exactly why Beijing says the law, the international law, is abused here. Two gentlemen, bear with me. I'll come back to you very shortly. Now we are getting word that the Permanent Court of Arbitration has released its award. For more information about that, let's go live to our correspondent Liu Xin in The Hague. Liu Xin, what is the latest?
Yes, it's about 10 minutes after 11 local time here in the Netherlands, and I'm standing right outside the Peace Palace, which is where the arbitral tribunal is registered. We have learned from China's Xinhua News Agency that a source from the Philippines Foreign Ministry has indicated that they have received the ruling from the arbitral tribunal. At this moment, we do not know more details about what is written in the ruling, and me as a member of the international press, I have registered with the arbitral tribunal on their mailing list, but I have not gotten any official press releases, so we are still awaiting at this moment to see the details of the ruling. But as China has indicated, and again earlier today by China's foreign ministry, that China will not accept and will not implement the so-called ruling of this case, because China believes that this case is illegitimate, and this was an illegitimate, illegal case brought by the former leader of the Philippines unilaterally. So whatever the ruling writes, China will not accept it. Right now, this morning, I have noticed that there is increased activity outside the Peace Palace here. There are two groups of people. I suppose one group is from the Philippines, although I'm not able to confirm that information, but they are holding up banners and shouting pro-Filipino slogans. On the other hand, there's also a group of Chinese people who have also gathered, and there has been some kind of a competition of their voices in support of their respective position. There are also more international media presence, including media from China, of course, and media from other Asian countries, as well as international media. So it's clear that all sides are keeping their eyes on this case very closely. Back to you.
CCTV's Liu Xin live for us in The Hague on the ruling from that tribunal. So it looks like the tribunal is out. We have more details coming up later in our program, including the official response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Now, China and the Philippines hold competing territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea. China has repeatedly called for dialogue and negotiations to resolve the issue. But in 2013, the Philippines unilaterally asked an arbitration court to decide the legality of China's dotted line, which marks China's territorial borders in the South China Sea. Here's a look at the disputed arbitration.
"中方不赞成菲律宾外交部提起国际仲裁的做法，并且已经表明了明确反对的立场。我们要求菲律宾方面停止错误做法。
中方不接受菲律宾方面提出的仲裁充分的国际法依据。
这个裁决 是无效的，对中方没有拘束。
由于仲裁庭对这个案件没有管辖权，明显没有管辖权，那么一个无权的机构做出的裁决，当然不具有任何的法律效力，也不存在承认和执行的问题。
Certain Western media outlets have alleged that China is disregarding international law in settling disputes over South China Sea. But as our correspondent Wang Guan finds out, that is not the case.
Some Western press love to blame this issue on an increasingly assertive Beijing in total disregard of international law. Well, let's look at it. The UN Convention on Law of the Sea says a state may declare in writing that it does not accept any one or more of the ways the law proposes to settle disputes concerning sea boundary delimitations. China made this declaration in 2006, so did some 40 other countries, including Australia, Argentina, Canada, and Denmark. So in saying no to compulsory third-party arbitration in sovereignty disputes, China has plenty of company in the West. A notable exception, the United States. Washington did not sign the convention. The U.S. Congress has not been able to ratify it out of national security concerns since the Reagan administration. You may ask, should the international law settle these disputes? Well, that's been debated for decades, if not centuries. Nation-states and the notion of sovereignty started off as Western concepts. In 1648, Western European countries signed the Peace of Westphalia. The series of treaties set the stage for the formation of nation-states as we know it. The realist school of international relations interpret these treaties this way. The fundamental principle of international law is that each nation has sovereignty over its territory to the exclusion of external jurisdiction. Of course, legal scholars in the liberal school argue that international law should be more invasive and regulate state behavior for the better. But who decides what's better? With these clashing views in international relations and politics, the debate over the scope and power of international law on South China Sea disputes is likely to continue for a long time.
Some 30 international law experts from Asia, Africa, the United States, and Europe met in The Hague in June. They exchanged views on the arbitration unilaterally initiated by the Philippines on the South China Sea disputes. They believe the proceedings of the case are questionable, pointing out that the disputes should be resolved through direct negotiation. They also say outside intervention can only aggravate the tensions. CCTV's Wu Haojun has more.
The law to declare.
Abdul Gadir Karoma, former judge at the International Court of Justice, has presided over many cases on sovereignty and maritime delimitation disputes. He stressed that the disputes can be complicated and negotiation is the best way to solve them.
Obviously, in my view, I think the best method for this kind of dispute is to negotiate. This is my view. And I think, and then you want a settlement that will be sustainable. You know, eventually you have the littoral states, they never have to live together. They should feel comfortable with whatever settlement they reach.
Abraham so far was a former legal advisor to the U.S. State Department. He now serves as a senior fellow in the Foreign Policy and National Security Affairs at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University. He also voiced his support for China's stance. He believes the litigation has caused far more harm than good. He says the U.S. should urge the Philippines to return to negotiation with China to settle the maritime territorial disputes in the South China Sea.
Really unfortunate because the U.S. is not even a member of this treaty regime, and we are acting as though we know morally better what should be done than China does. So it's very complicated issues, but one where I think diplomacy should have been used to a much greater extent than law.
The experts also called on the international community to adopt the correct, comprehensive, and integral interpretation of the UN Convention. They also urged relevant parties to resolve disputes through reasonable and effective dialogues. Wu Haojun, CCTV.
CCTV has interviewed Alberto Encamienda, former Secretary General of the Maritime and Oceans Affairs Center of the Philippine Foreign Affairs Department. He said the Philippine government is responsible for raising tension in the South China Sea.
Encamienda had worked for the Philippine Foreign Affairs Department for 35 years. He had dealt with maritime issues for a long time. He said although the Philippines carefully cloaked the unilateral arbitration on South China Sea, the claim is in essence an issue of territorial sovereignty, and the arbitral tribunal has no jurisdiction over territorial disputes.
I think that is an artificially recourse by the Philippines to insist on first sovereign rights and not sovereignty. But will it really solve anything? I don't think so.
Based on the declaration of the conduct of parties in the South China Sea signed by China and ASEAN countries, including the Philippines, disputes should be solved through negotiations. The Benigno Aquino III government claimed that they initiated the arbitration after conducting over 50 consultations and negotiations with China. But Encomienda, who was then in charge of the negotiation, sees the situation differently. He noted China has repeatedly tried to get the Philippine government back to the negotiation table, but Manila never responded. The former Philippine maritime official also said China should not be demonized in terms of the South China Sea issue, since it was the Philippines which first engaged in reclamation activities in South China Sea.
As we tried to strengthen our control of the islands, we were the first to build an airfield there. We were among the claimant countries, not only China, but among the 5 claimant countries, the Philippines was the first to build an airfield.
Since the 1970s, the Philippines has illegally claimed sovereignty over and illegally occupied several China's islands and reefs. The Philippines engaged in construction work on and arming of the islands and reefs it illegally occupied. Yang Chengxi, CCTV.
Let's turn back to our studio guests here. Now, Professor Zhang, talking about international law, China maintains that the Philippines has abused the international law. And by not participating in the arbitration and not accepting any ruling that comes out of it, China is actually abiding by international law. I want to get your take on this matter.
Okay. Let's come to the point of international law and the dispute settlement. The fundamental principle is that the nations has the obligation to settle the dispute by peaceful means. China never used force or threat of use of force to settle these issues with Philippines in the South China Sea. And second, although the means must be peaceful, but anyway, you have the freedom to choose the methods for the peaceful settlement. I would like to emphasize on this point that judicial settlement never needs the consent from the parties. So that is quite clear. Some people argue that China, as a party state to UNCLOS, you have already given the consent to this means, judicial means, but which is, I think, is not correct. China argues not only because the tribunal does not have jurisdiction, China argues, and China believes so, that the tribunal manifestly does not have jurisdiction. And why? The substance will go back to Professor Zhu's elaboration of 3 points. Let me just put shortly. First, the consent given by China is only on the dispute concerning interpretation or application of the convention, and territorial disputes obviously not. Interpretation or application of the convention. Mm-hmm. Second, even there is dispute concerning interpretation or application of the convention, for example, delimitation, China has, as you said, opted out in the year of 2006. So now Philippines, some people describe it like it's a kind of package to pact over these disputes, territorial delimitation, as something irrelevant to sovereign dispute. But if you look this submission closely,
the essence of the subject matter
the essence means that your submission, the Philippines, depends on the settlement of territorial dispute, or it will have an implication or de facto comes to or leading to the delimitation dispute. And finally, as Professor Zhu introduced, that is I think, a very sudden legal attack that Philippines did some 3 years ago. It is peaceful, but it is not friendly, and it is the Philippines does not went over the preconditions of exchange of views or the other diplomatic means.
As we wait for the details of that ruling to come out, one thing that is certain is that, first of all, China doesn't recognize the ruling. Second of all, that arbitral court doesn't have enforcement. It doesn't have its enforcement forces. So on a legal level here, what's going to happen next?
Well, the legal level is that as a procedural matter, that case will be closed now. There's no further proceedings, so it will be closed. Considering the Chinese position, I guess that our position will not, and I would suggest not give detailed comments on the outcome of the award on the merits, which I think has been delivered some minutes ago. Fundamentally, I will not use a scrap of paper, but that is quite a vivid description of our position, that the tribunal does not have competence, and therefore that is something abuse of his competence or power, and therefore all the outcome, it doesn't matter it's in favor of Philippines or in favor of China, it's null and void, and that's all.
Enforcement of this with a tribunal award, it's a very official name. Usually we refer it to some sort of a ruling, but it's an official name of the, we say, arbitration result is tribunal award. It sounds a very legal Pacific term. In theory, there is some sort of way of binding, but it's a very controversial issue. The reason is if all some sort of details concerning this jurisdiction and concerning this, we say, some sort of real content prove some sort of, we say, valid. And also all the content of the awards will be turning out to be some sort of a big, mess. Of course, it's a binding effects will automatically disappear. So, but on the other hand, we will see a real effect of this tribunal awards probably just to start off, because as I mentioned, so real implication of this.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'll come back to you momentarily. I'm very sorry. You're watching CCTV News Desk. We'll be right back after a short break.
Troubled waters with a history of disputes. The sovereignty claims in the South China Sea. Manila files an international challenge, which Beijing flatly rejects. CCTV News presents The South China Sea, an examination of the arbitration case at the UN Tribunal.
Let's go live again to our correspondent Liu Xin in The Hague. Liu Xin, now that the arbitration result has come out, what more details can you give us at this moment?
Yes, indeed. We have received the press releases in 3 different languages, English, Chinese and French. And as I browse through it, it is not surprising at all. This is the kind of result or ruling that China has been rejecting all along. And not surprisingly, it has overwhelmingly ruled that many of China's claims or many of the Philippines' claims have ground. And I'm going to read some of the most important findings. For instance, concerning China's historic rights and the 9-dash line or the U-shaped line, the tribunal ruled that although China and Chinese people, Chinese sailors, fishers have used these islands in the past, but there are no evidence showing that historically China has claimed control of these waters and the resources in an exclusive manner. So the tribunal believes that there is no legal basis for China's claim of the 9-dash line and the historic titles within the waters in the South China Sea. Another important point of contention is the legal status of some maritime features in the South China Sea. And again, the court gave itself jurisdiction and decided to look at the individual rights or individual legal entitlement of these features instead of looking at the Nansha Island as a group, as China has always insisted. And the court again ruled in favor of the Philippines, saying that none of the individual island features in the Nansha group island can have exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, and they cannot be regarded as an archipelago. Again, a position that China has opposed from the very beginning. The tribunal also ruled that China's action in the disputed waters are against the rule, against the law, including so-called Chinese prevention of the Philippine fishing and exploitation of oil and gas reserves, and so on and so forth. And the tribunal also decided that China has damaged the maritime environment of the disputed waters, among other findings of the ruling. Indeed, it has been a very strong statement, largely in favor of the Filipino claims of the Filipino side. But as we have claimed, China does not believe that this tribunal has jurisdiction over these matters. However, as we can see from here, that the tribunal went ahead anyway with the ruling and have decided on each of these positions, despite China's reasoning, China's position on each of these rulings.
Just like you said, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has reiterated that the tribunal has no legal right to settle the dispute, no jurisdiction whatsoever. So how will this case proceed after the announcement?
Indeed, nobody can stop them. I mean, at this moment, although the tribunal has no law enforcement mechanism, so they cannot force China to accept it, but there will be, as we have witnessed well before the release of the ruling, political pressure from Western countries to pressure China to accept it, to abide by it. And also there will be a lot of talk in the Western media to give China the big cab of a political or international legal outlaw, and this we have already seen for a long time. On the other hand, however, if China decides not to abide by it, potentially the Philippines could construe a controversy over the interpretation or implementation of this ruling, and this case could potentially be brought further. But at this moment, we do not know what the Philippine side will do based on China's reaction to the ruling.
CCTV's Liu Xin live for us in The Hague. Liu Xin, many thanks. Now for more on that ruling, let's turn back to our studio guests here in Beijing. Now, let me begin first by saying that China's stance is clear. It does not accept any rulings, nor will this ruling have any effects on China's interests in the South China Sea. But given the details in the ruling, I want to start with you, Professor Zhu. What's your take on this?
Of course, my take is very complicated. First, I have to say, after a very, very quick glance of what is just written in some sort of issued awards, I find it's very sophisticatedly worded. So some sort of, we say, the wording, some sort of conclusion, very, delicately, just phased out. But the problem is, what's the real content? What's the real substance of this, some sort of, we say, tribunal was? My first very, very essential impression is it's a very one-sided. it's very decisively leaning towards the Philippines, we say some sort of such a filing. So it's totally unfair because we have to say, for example, any ruling on the U-shaped line, we say the South China Sea 9-dash line, should be dated back to its historical feasibility. But this, I think, was touch does not touch on any historical feasibility, and it just instead very simply and very mechanically just projects some sort of, we say, legal examination. I consider it's very partial, and it's also unfair to China. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Second, I see, for example, maritime features. It's also say all the maritime features, as we say, filed by the Philippines, and in Filipinos, some sort of, we say, such a filing has been clarified by the tribunal. But the problem is, the China's claim of that maritime feature is some sort of, we say, holistic way. It's some sort of the China's holistic claim of all such maritime features, rather than just how say calculating or deciding how this feature will be just how say prostituted in these areas one after another based on there's some sort of a very mechanically defined maritime entitlement. So from these points, I have to say this ruling totally divide some sort of China's holistic approach to claim all such maritime features. It's also another very clear partiality we have to point out in this awards. Then last one, I found it's also very interesting. For example, so how China could just how say claim those features both in some sort of in a historical context and the legal context. So some sort of such a combination actually is undividable. The interesting base or important base to underline the China's claim. So China enjoy a lot of legality of the China's claim over these features, but I think this was very, just dramatically just trying to set out all some sort of such a, we say, coherent and cohesive connections of the China's maritime feature-based claim, and just trying to put those features very separately into the different contexts. For example, which is falling into the Philippines EEZ range, which one is some sort of their real geographical entitles or features. I consider that kind of some sort of a dissemination is, of course, against some sort of the legal fairness to support the China's claim, because both historically and legally, China take all the features as a whole. Some sort of such a holistic approach is a very strong legal instrument to justify the China's claim. But this award is really just trying to make all of China's claim into some sort of small pieces. How can it just stand on? So it's a big question.
Well, even though the ruling has ruled primarily in favor of the Philippines, I think it's fair to say it didn't come as a surprise to many people. Now, Professor
Not
Zhang,
at all.
yeah, I
Not
want to
at
get
all.
your first
Yes,
impression
you read,
on that ruling.
The same tribunal's award on jurisdiction delivered October last year. If you read into the lines, you will not be surprised to see such a result coming. I agree with Professor Zhu that is a one-sided decision. It looks very funny. It's like a default judgment in case that China did not show up in the arbitration, whereas the tribunal itself pointed out that according to their rules, there won't be such a default judgment. The tribunal must decide the case in accordance with law and fact. But however, I need to go into the details before making any comments substantively to these the decision. But one thing, at the first glance, I think that some of our neighboring countries may be quite unhappy to read into, for example, the tribunal's ruling on the maritime features as whether it is rock or an island. We all know there's Okinotori Shima. I don't know such countries will be satisfied with the ruling. And as a matter of fact, the jurisprudence was International Court of Justice very cautious in proceeding these very complicated and unsettled interpretive issues regarding whether a features could be an island or a rock. So that is a very primitive observation on this point.
Well, China's stance is pretty much that this doesn't change anything. This won't change anything in the future. China's interest in the South China Sea, China's stance in the matter. But now that with this ruling out, how do you think the international community will look at it? And if this ruling will change the relationship China has with its neighbors when it comes to issues in the South China Sea?
Of course, I think it's a very good question. First of all, I think that China's position has been very, they say, exactly and very firmly consistent. So no matter how the tribunal awards just projects itself, I don't think that China's position will be changeable. But the problem is the implication also will be a very interesting question. For example, China's opposition, of course, will be overplayed by Western media, then say, okay, so it's some sort of indicator of how China don't want to comply himself with some sort of international rule. But I don't think such a view truly could take any grounds, because we also see the real response to this tribunal awards usually is a test of a different, the political will, and it's also some sort of extension of a very contentious political calculation. So then, first of all, I have to say the real response from Chinese neighbor, from the broader community, will be very divided, because there are different calculations, different interests pursued, and also there's very different identities of how such awards could just a real functioning in the settlements of the South China Sea disputes. We should care about this diversity, but we couldn't entrap ourselves into this diversity, because this world is very real, very competing, and also very diversified. But second is how we could just take good use of the issuing of this world and collecting or lining up with our neighbors in the pursuit of the real settlement, and at least the way say de-escalation of tension in South China Sea. That will be a very big question. I think that China's real position deserves a lot of understanding. China's rejection does not automatically mean China would like to, we say, some sort of worse reaction, or China's approach now is turning on to some sort of way to like to take over all. I think that China's diplomatic resilience and flexible are truly at the table. So from this point, we call on understanding. The third one, of course, is very, very important. No matter how we diversify, over looking at or evaluate this awards, we should stop from any overreacting, because if any players they like to overreacting and also they like to some sort of way say overplaying some sort of such a real effects of this award, that will be very potentially risky. So then for the moment, what I can comment here is all the sides should be sitting down. We need a cool head.
On the topic of neighborly relations, Professor Zhang just pointed out that some of China's neighbors may not be happy because of how the tribunal ruled on some maritime features, because they have these maritime features as well. But could there be some neighbors that are happy with this ruling because Now they can follow suit. Now they know an international tribunal can rule against China. Is that a legitimate concern here?
Of course. I don't think whatever way friendly and benignly, just behave ourselves, then we can please most of our neighbors or most of the parties in the real world. Because as I mentioned, it's a very competing world. So we have a different calculation, we have a different interest, we also have a different policy priority. But at maximum, we should work together. We should also sticking together in any settlements of the disputes. So over this, we say the South China Sea territorial disputes, the China's policy has been very clear-cut and very consistent. On the one hand, we would like to take the norm, but this was just a part of the norm. It does not mean it's the entire architecture of the norm. Without just accepting this norm, it also will not just definitely mean China is totally turned back to the norm. So we should make such two things totally and clearly separate. Then second is, if the very primary motive behind this award is to boost some sort of a settlement of a disputes, then what's some sort of, we say, pragmatic door state? Both China and the Philippines could work down and get us to some sort of real engagement, to the settlement, we say, solving some sort of process. It's not just, we say, some sort of such an award itself. It's a real diplomatic negotiation and contacts. So for the moment, I really strongly hope then the Manila also could be very quickly and also very primarily respond to the China's goodwillness. Then let's reach out at the simultaneously, then we can just initiate whatever the formality will be, but we needed to sit down and talk.
China will no doubt continue to safeguard its interests in the South China Sea as well as stability and security. But given the details in this ruling, do you think there could be fine-tuning of China's actions? Do you think there could be more new strategies in that area? Let me get this question from both of you. Let me start with Professor Zhang.
Well, I agree that the parties may need to cool them down and rethink about the ruling, so-called. Fundamentally, I think that we may not be. It will be too fast, too soon to see whether our other neighbors will be happy with this outcome. Well, let me just get it clear. This is a ruling, in our view, rendered by a tribunal without competence to rule, and in our view, it doesn't help settling the dispute in between the Philippines and us, or the other neighboring countries and us in the South China Sea. So we still have to wait. I worry somehow if this ruling was taken or perceived by some of the neighbors and drive them to act more aggressively in the region. I don't think that is a happy ending that any of us would like to see.
Yeah. One more point I'd like to add.
Of course.
I think, of course, it's a very, very critical moment for a region to think about what's a proper response to this award. First of all, I have to say, yes, we will have a different calculation, different, some sort of interests. But whatever our arguments will be, we should recognize issuing of this award is a very important new opportunity. So on one hand, I really hope that our neighbor and the water community could really enhance their understanding of what's a real policy claim or sovereign claim of China over the South China Sea. There's a lot of distortion, there's a lot of misperception. they sweeping through all the Western media coverage. And second, I think just don't, we say, overestimate some sort of China's reaction. So yes, we oppose, but it does not just how say notably mean that China will just how say also take some sort of we say retaliatory response. It's also some sort of I see a lot of such a overestimation. So then for the Chinese, of course, I think it's a very, very important moment. I hope the Chinese also could recognize in a way that China is re-emerging. It will destined to be bumpy. That's destined to be some sort of, we say, rocky. So it's a taste for our, not patience, it's a taste to China's wisdom, strategic vision, and our some sort of such a, we say, sophistication in handling all kind of challenges and problems. So then my suggestion is we should also calm down. And also, on the one hand, we should follow up with our, very, very well-pronounced opposition. But on the other hand, we also should be very actively searching for some sort of real diplomatic engagement to our neighbors. Then the things also will be turning better.
Talking about diplomatic engagement, we've talked a lot about what China is ready to do, what China is determined to do. Let's talk about the Philippines. What is different now is that the Philippines has a new president, and President Duterte seems friendlier towards China and has shown willingness to mend ties with China. Do you think things could change with this new president?
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about the prospect of the Philippine-China relations under the government of Duterte. I think President Duterte reset some sort of tone to bilateral relations with Beijing. So he's a very pragmatic guy. And on the other hand, he also reprioritized his policy. He'd like to invest more on domestic, economic developments, combating against the criminals. So he sounds very positive. On the other hand, I think he's less biased about the perception of China. So then, I see Duterte government's truly a big contribution to some sort of, we say, refabrication of our bilateral relations. So for the moment, I also hope Manila will not just, over pleased about some sort of their victory in some sort of such a legal fighting, because...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll turn back to you very soon. Let's also go live to our reporter Xi Jia in Manila. Xi Jia, with the arbitration results out, what is the reaction from the Philippine government? What are its next steps?
So just shortly after the ruling results come out, the Foreign Affairs Secretary had a statement saying that they welcome the assurance of the outcome, and they will make the experts study very carefully about the outcome. And they also say that it will pursue the peaceful resolution and management of disputes with a view to prompting and enhancing peace and stability in the region. And for the further reaction, they haven't have possible move yet, but just in this afternoon, the presidential spokesman had a press briefing when asking about the guiding principle deciding the next steps for the government. It says that the top priority will be the national interest. And the presidential spokesman said that everything will have to be subject to a discussion. It's going to be a lengthy decision, and there will be a number of details that need to be properly thread out before any statement and any decision is made publicly. And for the further, when asking about the plans, when facing a favorable ruling, the presidential spokesman said that everything will have to be discussed because everything is systematic. It's not just a question of having silo solutions. Everything will have to be intermeshed. All the areas of the government will have to be considered. And the new government of the Philippines, they want to re-establish a closer relationship with China. And the new President Duterte, he said that he would not flaunt any favorable rulings as it may put the country into an embarrassing situation. And as Duterte is a practical politician compared with his predecessor, so the policy on the South China Sea will see some adjustments in this new government. Back to you.
CCTV Xi Jiao live for us in Manila, the Philippines. Let me turn back to our studio guest here. So we've heard from the Philippine government. They're happy to see the outcome, but a reporter there also mentioned there could be some policy changes down the road. Let's go back to our topic earlier. What do you think will happen next between China and the Philippines?
Of course, I think, first of all, both sides should walk out of the shadow of some sort of a very contending and even contentious, the arguments our tribunal awards or the tribunal process as well. Now we say the second issues just fall into the ground. Whatever way are different over, this arbitration, but we are standing at the new starting line. This starting line is this arbitration at the maximum is just a reference. It's not some sort of, we say, compulsory, obligations to just to keep both sides sticking around. So then, realistically, I see the Manila's response is really pleasing, because he also say, on the one hand, he's pleased to this awards, but on the other hand, he also Manila is looking forward to some sort of diplomatic negotiation with China as a very important counterpart. So then, if both sides, we could just reset some sort of policy tone. In that way, I think the most important thing is we should initiate some sort of a diplomatic contacts and negotiation and substantiating some sort of real solution, even just a periodic, but make both sides working on a very tangible and a very substantial, diplomatic solution. That would be very, very constructive.
Thank you very much for your insight. And Professor Zhang, I will come back to you in just a moment. Please bear with me here. Now, the Chinese government has issued a statement on its territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea. The statement says China is the first to have discovered, named, and explored and exploited islands in the South China Sea and relevant waters, and the first to have exercised sovereignty and jurisdiction over them continuously, peacefully, and effectively, thus establishing territorial sovereignty there. The Chinese government has reaffirmed the rights and interests there in maps and various laws. The statement says China has sovereignty over islands including Dongsha, Xisha, Zhongsha, and Nansha, and has internal waters, territorial sea, and contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf based on them, and also historic rights in the region. The statement says China is willing to resolve disputes peacefully through negotiation and consultation with states directly concerned and jointly develop relevant areas. It says China respects and upholds the freedom of navigation and overflight enjoyed by all states in the South China Sea. Now we understand the Chinese Foreign Ministry also has a statement, and for that, let's go live to CCTV's Hona right here in Beijing. Hona, what more can you tell us about the reaction from the Foreign Ministry?
Well, the Foreign Ministry has just issued a statement. It solemnly declares that the award is null and void and has no binding force. China neither accepts nor recognizes it. China's territorial and maritime rights and interests shall under no circumstances be affected by those awards. China opposes and will never accept claim or action based on the awards. Well, China's stance has always been consistent. The Foreign Ministry says the result won't affect China's territorial integrity or maritime rights in the South China Sea. China has reiterated its stance of non-acceptance of third-party dispute settlements or any imposed solution. Foreign Ministry said the arbitration violates relevant terms in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The result of the arbitration is illegal. Back to you, Zhongshi.
CCTV's Hona live for us in Beijing. Hona, many thanks. Now let's go back to our studio guests right here in Beijing. Before we get to the reaction from the Chinese government and the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Mr. Zhang, you were saying?
Well, I think that we, of course, hope that there will be a talk in between Philippines and us. But one thing I think that's important for the Philippines government to delink this so-called ruling and future talk. Otherwise, I'm not sure what will happen. I will not say I'm not sure. I think that we need to reevaluate the situation in the South China Sea if one side insists the ruling is a must for the future negotiation.
Now that we have the official statements and official responses from the Chinese government, I want to talk with you a little bit about these statements and these responses. Now, China has again emphasized its historic rights of the islands in the South China Sea. In particular, China has emphasized that the freedom of navigation and overflight will be protected. I think one of the myths about China's actions in the South China Sea, and one of the well-traveled stories, is that China's actions in this region are impeding the freedom of navigation. This is what the press have been reporting, foreign press in particular, have been reporting. I want to get your take on this matter because there has been no case of China impeding freedom of navigation in the South China Sea.
Of course, I think some sort of accusation of China's maritime rights safeguarding acts, truly or falsely, just undermine the freedom of navigation is really, we say, exaggeration. Freedom of navigation, by definition, is a very military concept because it's not just the House. Of course, it's only initiated by the United States. It's also some sort of broadly and also very, very firmly enshrined in international maritime law. But when the U.S. keep tapping with some sort of freedom of navigation, it's a real motivation. It's very military. It's just the equivalent to Americans' military capability projection, so they enjoy some sort of a free access. So in that sense, I think Americans keep pushing on some sort of freedom of navigation in South China Sea is very militarily motivated. It's also some sort of, we say, full display of Americans' real strategic intention, because U.S. don't want to see any peer competitor in the maritime domain in West Pacific Ring. But we don't think that China's some sort of a legitimized, a maritime build-up and a maritime construction will substantially constitute some sort of real challenge to the U.S. So then I see a lot of some sort of such a friction over the freedom of navigation is very, very Americanized. But it's a real intention, of course, is just pushing China back, but without some sort of a real evidence.
Talking about the United States, I think to some extent it really is the elephant in the room here. As a strong ally of the Philippines and with its pivot to Asia, the United States has made it no secret that its presence in the South China Sea means something and that the United States is here to stay. Going forward, what do you think the role of the United States is in the South China Sea situation, and what can China do to maintain peace and stability in the region?
Of course, I think literally Beijing tends to see the United States as some sort of actors out of the South China Sea, because U.S. is not a coastal state of the South China Sea. U.S. has no territorial disputes with any claimant state. But the problem is the U.S. say, no, I'm a Pacific power. I'm also preeminent power. Since the end of the Second World War, U.S. enjoyed, for example, more than 70 years of some sort of such a maritime superiority in West Pacific. Therefore, U.S. just presumed. So if the China's sovereign claim could just make some constraint to Americans' unchallengeable superiority in the West Pacific Ring, then it will cause backlash. But on the other hand, I have to say, America's intervention into the South China Sea is much driven by America's ground strategy, because everybody knows it's a primacy based. So what's the primacy? It's a very American term, but primacy is just definitely premised on unchallengeable dominance of a U.S. both in maritime area and in airspace. So I think nevertheless, I see it's a real strategic intention just to drive America's intervention in South China Sea.
As we wrap up the show, I'd like to get from both of you what's going to happen down the road, because we want to keep channels open, diplomatic channels, communication channels, and possibly legal channels as well. Let me first start with you, Professor Zhang. What do you think is going to happen next, and how can we get all involved parties back to the negotiating table and solve the disputes bilaterally?
I think this is very important to watch the role of the United States in the whole game. U.S. said that he would be neutral in this dispute in the South China Sea. I think that this is one condition for us to move forward, is that the United States will not only keep the commitment in these words, but also will fulfill it as an action, which means that the U.S. need to refrain from further the so-called FONOPs, Freedom of Navigation Operation in the South China Sea. I think that is somehow very critical for us to find a way forward. I think China is always open to the neighboring countries, including Philippines, to negotiate, unless the Philippines is encouraged by some other states who obviously, while we're saying keep neutral, but obviously take sides. I think that will be quite dim for our future.
Yeah, I think
briefly, if you can, because we're nearing the end of the show. If you can.
Yeah, I think the negotiation is always unstoppable calling. So neither of sides could just stop engaging from this, negotiation and talking. But most important is, if you would like to talk, then you should be psychologically and practically, ready to follow up with some sort of give and take approach. So then I think it's very important. The second is, we also need some sort of, stay away from the, nationalistic sentiments. Now the nationalism is really rising and simmering in the entire region. It's also a very important disruption behind the South China Sea disruption, friction. So then I think given this depth of, nationalistic sentiments, all the players also needed to calm down and also needed to undercut some sort of any emotional response.
It's important to remember that the story doesn't end here today. Professor Zhu, Professor Zhang, thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching CCTV News Desk. I'm Zhong Shi in Beijing. Goodbye.